Happy day. Today we'll look into the topic dividend policy. Before moving on to the actual topic, let's look into what is a dividend. So a dividend is a part of a profit that is given to the shareholders of a company. So the company, after paying to all the third-party liabilities, will finally have a profit accumulated for itself, which will be divided among the preference shareholders and the equity shareholders. This part of profit that the company gives to the shareholders is known as the dividend. Now, let's get into the two types of dividend theories. One theory states that dividend policy is relevant to the valuation of a firm. The other theory states that any dividend policy will not affect the value of the firm. There is no link between the dividend policy that the company follows and the value of the firm. So, these are the two types of theories under dividend policy. So coming into the relevance theory. So the relevance theory states that the dividend policy that the company is adopting will directly reflect the value of the firm. We have two different models under the relevance theory, one being the Walters model and the other being the Gordon's model. Now let's look into the Walters model. This Walters model was proposed, as the name states itself, by Professor James E. Walter. So under this Walters model, they say that the dividend policy that the company is following has a long-term effect on the share value of the company. Now let's see how this affects the share value of the company. They also say that you will have to retain the shareholdings, or you will have to retain the dividend only when it is required and not in all the cases. So under Walters model, they are dividing the firms into three different types. One being the growth firm, the next normal firm, and the last one being the declining firm. So how do they differentiate between a growth, normal and a declining firm? So we are taking two things into consideration. One being the rate of return that the company earns and the other being the cost of capital. The R there represents the rate of return or the return that the company is expecting, and the K represents the cost of capital or the cost of equity that the company intends to pay to its shareholders. So comparing these two, we can divide the firm into three parts. When your rate is more than the cost of equity, it is termed as a growth firm. So obviously when you get more returns than what you will have to pay, that is termed to be a growth firm. You are in your growth stage. When the return is equal to the cost of capital, that is when you earn a return equivalent to what you need to pay to the shareholders, you are called a normal firm. When you get returns less than what you will have to pay to the shareholders, that is termed as a declining firm. So the growth firm have to adopt 100% retention, meaning they should not declare any dividend and they should retain the entire earnings for themselves. This is because the growth firm is on the growing stage and it can invest more and more in its company and get a lot of returns. So the growth firm has to adopt a policy of retaining all the dividend. The second category, which is a normal firm, where your return is equal to your cost of capital. So under normal firm, there is no impact about the dividend policy on your share value. The reason for this being, any policy that you adopt for a normal firm, it will not have any impact on the value of the firm. The third category, being the declining firm, has to go in for 100% of dividend, which means they have to pay out all the earnings that they have and they should not retain anything for themselves. The reason being, the company is on a declining stage, so any retention that they make and any investment that they make is going to give them a loss. So it is better to give the dividends to the shareholders themselves rather than retaining it and wasting it and getting a loss in the company. So these are the three types of firm under Walter's model, and these are the three kind of policies that Walter has proposed for each type of firm. Now, this is the explanation that I have been giving you. So the optimum dividend policy for a growth firm is going to be 0% payout. Your DP ratio means dividend payout ratio. So it's going to be 0%, which means you're going to retain the entire amount and invest in your business because you have a lot of opportunities. You are on the growth side and you can definitely go in for a lot of opportunities to earn more money. When you are a normal firm, you can follow any method because that doesn't have an effect on it because you're earning as much as you have to pay. When you are a declining firm, you will obviously have to go in for a 100% dividend payout because retaining your dividend is not going to give you any benefit. Now, these were the assumptions that Walter's model had taken in order to propose this particular theory. One being internal financing. So Walter's model states that you will have to go in for internal financing. being you will have to take your reserves and surplus first and then utilize the other sources of finance. The second assumption being constant return in cost of capital. So they are assuming that your cost of capital is going to remain the same over the longer period. So the third assumption being they are only going to go in for two types of policies, one being 100% payout and the other being 100% retention. The fourth assumption says that you're going to have a constant EPS. EPS refers to earnings per share, and you're also going to have a constant DPS, which is dividend per share. This means that over the years, the company's earnings and dividend are not going to change. And the last one being, these theories are given for an infinite time, assuming that the company will go on forever. So they do not have a stop point, or they are not telling us that this policy can be followed for, let's say, 5 years or 10 years or 15 years. They say that this particular policy or this particular company that we are dealing with in the dividend policy is going to go for an infinite amount of time. Now, this is the explanation for each of the assumption that I've given. So, internal financing. So, they are not going in for any new issue of shares. They are not going in for any new form of sources. They are only going in for their reserves and surplus. There's a constant IRR and a constant cost of capital. They assume that the returns are going to be the same. The cost of capital is also going to be the same over the years. So, which means your R and K are going to be constant. The third assumption being they are following only two policies, 100% retention or 100% dividend. The next assumption being there's a constant EPS and DPS, and the last one being the company has a very long or an infinite time. Now, this is the formula using which we will have to find the price or the value of share under Walter's model. So, the formula goes like this: P is equal to D plus R by KE into E minus D divided by KE. So, P refers to the market price, which is what we are going to find. D refers to the dividend per share. R refers to the rate. E refers to the EPS, which is earnings per share, and KE, cost of equity or cost of capital. The Walters model assumes that there is going to be no external financing. But in real life, a company can go in for external financing like issuing new shares, issuing new debentures, or getting new loans. These will be beneficial in certain cases rather than utilizing the dividend that the shareholders are going to get. The second being, they are assuming that your R and K are going to be constant, which is not true. In real life or in actual market, your R and K can never be constant between 2 years. Your cost of capital and your R keeps changing based on the performance of the firm. Now, we're going in for the next model, which is Gordon's model. So, as the name suggests, this was proposed by Professor Gordon. So, he found that the criticisms given for the Walters model was right and wanted an improvement on this Walters model. So, rather than calling this Gordon's model as a separate model, we can call it as an improvised version of the Walter model itself. Under this Gordon's model, Gordon states that the value of the firm is going to be affected by the dividend policy that the firm follows. But there is only one difference that Walter and Gordon theories state. Walter theory states that there is going to be a constant rate and constant cost of capital. Gordon states that there is going to be a growth in the market. This growth can be due to the inflation or due to the price value of the money. So, there is going to be a growth element added in the Walters model. Now, let's look into the assumptions. We can find that most of the assumptions that Walter followed has been followed by Gordon as well, except for a few. So, all equity firm, which means they are not going in for any external financing. This one assumption is equivalent to the Walter model's assumption. Then, no external financing, again the same thing. Constant returns and constant cost of capital. This is also taken directly from the Walters model. So, the Gordon's model assumed that there is going to be a constant return and constant cost of capital. Next being perpetual earnings. We can also find the same assumption in a different language in Walters model. That being the company has an infinite amount of life. The same thing is told here as well. And there are no taxes. This is one assumption that has been included in Gordon's model, being there are no taxes. Then there's going to be a constant retention in the company. This assumption is something different from the Walters model. Gordon's model states that they are going to constantly retain some amount for the company. So, they are going to follow a dividend policy which encourages retention. And finally, Walter's model had told us that there is going to be no growth as such in the earnings of the company. But Gordon's model tells us that the cost of capital is always going to be greater than the growth rate, which means we are going to have a growth rate involved in our firm. The only reason is that Gordon's model is having a growth element in it. That is the reason this has been given as a separate model to us. Otherwise, Walter and Gordon's model both face the same limitations. Let's go in for the last and most important model, which is Modigliani and Miller's model. So this model says that there is an irrelevance theory between the value of the firm and the dividend policy, meaning the dividend policy does not affect the value of the firm. Let's find out how this is being explained in the theory. First, we have the value of the firm. This value of the firm depends on the earning of the firm. The earning of the firm depends on the investment policy that the firm makes and not on the dividend policy. So the better investment you make, you get better earnings, because of which the value of the firm increases. So any form of dividend policy that the company follows will not affect the value of the firm. M.O.P approach states that if a company is going to hold certain amount of money and retain it for itself in order to invest in a different avenue, what happens is the value of the particular share increases, but there is no dividend given to the shareholders. On the other hand, if the company decides to give the dividend to the shareholders and not retain anything for the firm, we can find that the value of the share will remain same, but the company has given a dividend, which means the shareholder has got some amount of income in their hand. So ultimately, the shareholder either gets the income in the form of dividend or in the form of a capital appreciation in the value of their share. So both meaning that the total value of the firm will remain the same. So the assumptions of M.O.P model are the capital market structure is being followed and the people are completely rational. That is, they think only from their senses and there is no emotional or impulsive investment that they make. Second being there are no taxes. The third assumption being there is free flow of income, which means every shareholder knows about the market. The next one being there is no flotation cost, that is there is no cost of issuing new shares, because we obviously have a lot of cost involved when there is an issue of share. Next one being fraction investment is also possible, which means you can also invest in parts. You can invest in parts in a few company, you can invest the rest in another company, or you can invest a part of your investment in a few investment avenues and invest the rest in some other things. So there's no one project or one company concept here. And finally, the investment opportunities are very much known and the future profits can be projected very easily. So these are the assumptions that they have taken for the purpose of giving out this theory. Now this theory has two formulas, one being finding the prevailing market price and the other being finding the new market price. So both the formulas are the same. Based on whatever data we are required to find, we can use the alternative formula. So the formula goes as PO is equal to P1 plus D1 divided by K plus E, or P1 is equal to PO into 1 plus K point, or P1 is equal to P0 into 1 plus KE minus D1. Both the formulas are same based on what requirement we have. That is, our requirement could be to find the prevailing market price or the new market price. So based on the requirement, we can follow the formula. Again, M.O.P model also has a few criticisms. The first one being there is no perfect capital market that is available in the current scenario or in the real time life. So you cannot have a market where everybody knows about everything, where every information is given to everyone. So this is one problem. Second being, there is always a transaction cost involved in stock market and a flotation cost involved in the capital market. The third one being the lack of information. This is, people are not aware of the relevant information at the relevant time. And finally, there are no taxes, which has been assumed in M.O.P model, but in real life, we have different rates of taxes. The company cannot follow a fixed investment policy. The investment policy, like the dividend policy, has to change very frequently, because of which the value of the firm will obviously get affected. And the last one being the investor's desire to obtain current income. Let me explain this in detail. So the investor might feel like having an income now rather than having an increase in the value of their share. They might prefer getting dividend now rather than having it in the company and showing it as an increase in the value of the share. So it is always told it's better to have the bird in a hand rather than having two in a bush. So this particular proverb is suiting for this particular criticism. On a concluding note, we saw three different models of dividend policy: Walter model, Gordon model and M.O. model. Walter and Gordon model were relevant theories stating that the value of the firm and the dividend policy are relevant, but M.M. model stated that whatever dividend we pay to the shareholders are not going to affect the entire value of the firm. Thank you.